Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming at you with another AP Gov video. This is our second video on topic 1.6, focusing in on principles of American government. Now, last time we were here, we introduced the three branches of government, the legislative, the executive, and judicial, and talked about their responsibilities and why we needed to have this kind of a model as opposed to just having one person or one entity having all of the power. Now, today what we're going to do is we're going to start off by taking a look at the ability of stakeholders to have connections to the three branches of government, what we call access points. Now, note, when we say a stakeholder, we're not talking about somebody that's, holding up a piece of meat or something like that, but rather individual citizens and interest groups, people that are affected by the actions of government. So, basically everybody in America in some way, shape, or form is a stakeholder depending on, kind of what you're talking about. Some things might be a little bit more narrowly tailored to a certain group of folks, but all of us in some way, shape, or form are stakeholders with regards to what our government does through their policies. So with that being said, let's first take a look at how stakeholders can connect to the legislative branch, connect to Congress. And one way through that is through interest groups. Now, an interest group is an organization that exists to fight for the needs of its members, and its members will have a shared set of concerns, be it the NAACP looking out for the needs of African Americans, or the AFL-CIO looking out for the needs of industrial laborers, or the Chamber of Commerce looking out for the needs of business owners, the NRA looking out for the needs of gun owners, the AARP looking out for the goals of retired people, elderly people, or the AMA looking out for the needs of people that are doctors. So there are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of interest groups that do exist out there. Some much more famous than others, as we just showed you some examples here. And so what do these interest groups do? How do they have access points to Congress? Well, lobbyists through the process known as lobbying. And we'll get into lobbying a lot more towards the end of the year when we actually look at interest groups in a lot more depth. But basically what lobbying entails is basically trying to communicate to people in government what your needs are as an interest group. Obviously the more lobbyists, people that are hired professionally to advocate for your needs as an interest group, the more of a voice you're going to have, which means you're going to have, more, influence in what government does, particularly the legislative branch. When we go later in the year and we talk about, what lobbyists do, lobbyists do a lot of things that affect Congress. For example, they help to write legislation. They also provide critical information in a lot of committee hearings that are affecting the interests of the groups that are mentioned. So, bottom line, interest groups rely a lot on professional lobbyists, professional advocates to try to directly communicate with these members of Congress, write their legislation, be able to try to provide vital information regarding potential legislation that they're going to be voting on, stuff like that. Now, that being said, it's not just interest groups that can have an access point to Congress. So do we as individual citizens. And for many of us, this is kind of more of a traditional thing that we might recognize. Now, for example, we have the ability as individual citizens to directly try to reach out to our elected officials. Why? Because we are their constituents. They represent us. And so, in the old days, we would just write a letter, and send it off to our, representative and say, hey, I'm not happy with, how the roads are looking right now. What do we need to do to, fix these potholes, so to speak. Today, of course, we're going to probably do that, through more modern means such as, an email or something like that. And so citizens, commonly will voice their concerns, voice, their needs to members of Congress, and their staffers will then read those responses and, organize them and, present to that elected official, what their constituents are wanting and needing. But we also see individual citizens do this through research, through what's called the Congressional Research Service. So in other words, there is a government entity known as the CRS, the Congressional Research Service, and you can find out everything that Congress is doing, all of their committee meetings, all the hearings they're having, all the votes they take, all the stuff that they're doing, you can keep tabs on that through the CRS. And that's important because, government is never supposed to be working in secret. It's supposed to be working, in the sunlight, if you will. But you do have to do a little bit of work to really dig in to find out, what are they doing up there on Capitol Hill? Something else, obviously, that helps and is a lot easier, to be honest, than doing individual research to like the CRS is through the work of the media. We'll talk a lot more in depth about the media later on in this course as well. But basically, how the media covers Congress. And it really doesn't matter what outlet you're looking at. Be it NBC or Fox News. That tend to have a little bit of a lean ideologically, or even C-SPAN, which has no ideological lean. It's just literally a camera on Congress. You can use these media outlets to have an idea of what Congress is doing. What are they prioritizing? What are they having hearings on? What are the big votes that are coming up and stuff like that? And so as we'll talk later on, media is an example of what we call a linkage institution, something that connects us to government. So in other words, many of us would be honestly in the dark in terms of, what, Congress, for example, is looking at if it wasn't for the media letting us know through the news, what they're doing. Now, of course, Congress, the legislative branch, is just one of the branches of government. We also have access points to the other branches of government, including the executive branch. Now, when we talk about the executive branch, yes, you can, shoot an email to the White House and voice your concerns to the president and say, hey, I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that, and yes, there are staffers of the White House, that address that. But, the president is one person, and, you are going to have, honestly, more of an impact, more influence on, going a little bit, beyond the president in terms of, delving into the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy, as we'll study later, is, basically everybody else in the executive branch after the president and the vice president. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of government agencies, be it, the big departments that you may have heard of, like defense and justice and labor and commerce and things like that, or smaller, what I would kind of call bite-sized versions of those things called independent executive agencies, like, the National Science Foundation or NASA or, the National Archives, or regulatory commissions who exist to basically, make sure that, laws are being enforced properly in terms of, kind of serving as a referee for a lot of, different parts of the economy, especially like you've got the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, that kind of serves as a referee to make sure the stock market's operating properly, or the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which makes sure that, folks that are using, the traditional airways, radio, television, etc., are following the law, et cetera, et cetera. National Labor Relations Board, making sure that, mediation is happening properly between management and labor and, contract negotiations, stuff like that. And then also through, the various government corporations that exist. And yes, federal government does have companies, that exist. You've got, TVA, which is, a power company, the Postal Service, of course, and Amtrak, a train service. So, the bureaucracy is vast. It is, massive. And basically what you have to kind of keep in mind is that, if you've got, an issue with the mail, in theory, yeah, you could contact the president, but you're probably going to be much better served by contacting the Postal Service and say, hey, I've got a problem with, what's going on with my mail. So, that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, of course, also, you've got the judicial branch as a way to, connect to government. Now, obviously, we as Americans, we don't elect our federal judges, unlike, the president and members of Congress, but we are still connected to them, all right? The idea being is that we are connected by the decisions that they make, especially if you're talking about judicial review power. As we've said before, judicial review is the power of the Supreme Court to decide whether or not the actions of the other branches of government are constitutional. So that affects us. If you are, talking about, a very recent case talking, Harvard University case, focusing in on affirmative action. The court basically ruled that using affirmative action as a basis for deciding enrollment for colleges and universities is a violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. Well, that judicial review that was taken by the court, that affects everybody that wants to apply to go to college. Also, of course, you use the courts as a means to try to affect that change. You know what I mean? So in other words, if you are somebody that feels that you have had your rights violated by either another individual, an entity, or even by part of the government itself, you can use the judiciary as a means to fight for your rights and fight for your protection and fight to make sure that laws are being properly enforced and all that kind of stuff. So we certainly have connections to the judiciary. Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for now. When we come back, we'll take a look at another key important principle in American government, that is checks and balances. But we'll see you next time.